What do the Atlanta Falcons enemies think of the team? Well, we'll ask the hosts of Locked On Bucs and Locked On Saints on today's Locked On Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, and, of course, the very humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And we thank each and every one of you that makes us your first listen each and every day. Shout out to the everydayers. And you can become an everydayer. All you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So later in today's episode, we'll talk a little bit more about the potential of positionless football from a leftover question from earlier this week's mailbag. But we'll start today's episode having a conversation with Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson and Locked On Bucs co-host James Yarcho about the Atlanta Falcons. I had a conversation with both of those guys about their respective teams, in addition to what they thought about the Atlanta Falcons. And today we'll be focused primarily on the Falcons. And of course, you're noticing there's one NFC South rival team that is missing. And that is, of course, because the host of Locked On Panthers, Julian Council, is a coward and is ducking me for scheduling conflicts or whatever. But we'll have something for Julian come September. So without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints about the Atlanta Falcons right now. All right, everyone, we are back with another illustrious guest here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. He is none other than Ross Jackson of the Locked On Saints podcast. And yes, he is smiling, but we'll see how long he is smiling today, because he gets to talk about his least favorite football team. That is, of course, the Atlanta Falcons. And Ross, welcome to the show. But, now we will give you the floor, and you can be as positive or negative about the Atlanta Falcons as you see fit. But, as you look at this Atlanta Falcons team heading into the 2023 season, just, give your assessment of this team.
Yeah, look, the first word that comes to mind when I think of the Atlanta Falcons is trash. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. No, I actually, listen, I think that the Atlanta Falcons are the biggest threat to the NFC South when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. And I don't think it's close. The Carolina Panthers, they traded up. They got their number one overall selection. We might be talking about them a little bit more in 2024, 2025 than we will in 2023. We will be talking about them at some point, though. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are an absolute disaster. That's fine. They can stay there. But when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons, I think they're the New Orleans Saints' biggest threat in this division. Ryan Nielsen heading over there. Nobody in the New Orleans Saints fan base and the New Orleans Saints media landscape and the New Orleans Saints organization is going to sit here and say that Ryan Nielsen wasn't a huge pickup for the Atlanta Falcons as their defensive coordinator, because they saw how he impacted the New Orleans Saints as soon as he showed up in 2017 when he joined the team as a defensive line coach. This team, since 2017, with Ryan Nielsen in the building, has gone over 40 sacks in every 16-game span of every season that he's been there. And I know that pass rush has been a huge concern for the Atlanta Falcons over the course of the past couple of years. What is it, 63 sacks over the last 2 years? Ryan Nielsen and bringing over guys that are going to be able to help there, David Onyemata, Caden Ellis, and of course the additional investments that they made over in the defensive side, like Jessie Bates, all these guys that are going to impact coverage, which is going to keep the ball in the hands of quarterbacks and allow the defensive line to get there. You're probably going to see more than 40 sacks in Atlanta this year based upon Ryan Nielsen's track record. So I don't want to sleep on the Atlanta Falcons and pretend like just because they're a division rival of the team that I cover and of the team that I, let's be honest, root for, that like they're this trash team or whatever. Like they're the biggest threat to the New Orleans Saints, and the Saints are going to be in a situation, especially toward the end of the season, preparing to go up against the Atlanta Falcons after the bye week. week 12, which is week 12, and then again week 18, having those two big divisional matchups where these two might be tussling for the top of the division at that point, at a point in the season where for the past 2 seasons we've watched New Orleans Saints fail to stay healthy. That should be a major concern for them. So I think the New Orleans Saints look at the Atlanta Falcons as the actual threat that they are, even if the fan base is going to have a lot of fun making fun of the teams and the rivalry and all this other stuff. So I do think that this will be the first time in what, Aaron, 2 seasons that we actually really get to enjoy a Falcons Saints hate week, which we haven't really gotten to enjoy very much over the course of the past couple of years.
I'm definitely looking forward to that. Yeah, they just haven't hit the same the last
they really
couple of
haven't,
years.
man.
Yeah. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what, comes from this rivalry in December. But, talking about the Atlanta Falcons, everybody's big question is about Desmond Ridder. I'm just curious to pick your brain. Where are you at with Desmond Ridder and your expectations for him with this Atlanta Falcons team?
Yeah, I mean, I thought Desmond Ridder was the most pro-ready quarterback in his quarterback class, so I'm not going to sit here and say anything bad about him. I do think, though, that obviously he's a young quarterback, and a veteran defense like the New Orleans Saints and a veteran defensive coach like Dennis Allen is, I think, a good matchup for a quarterback in their second year, no matter who that quarterback is. So I do think I would give the Saints defense the advantage for now, projecting Desmond Ridder going into another year as the Atlanta Falcons quarterback. But I do think that he's a very good quarterback. He was my favorite quarterback in that draft class. I wanted him in New Orleans. So I'm not going to sit here and say that he's bad or anything like that. And he's got some really good weapons. I mean, just the backfield behind him. You think about the positions that are most important to a young quarterback, right? The guys that are behind him, and then the tail and the tight ends. He's got one of the best tight ends in the NFL in Kyle Pitts, or let's say one of the most athletic and impressive tight ends in the NFL in Kyle Pitts. He's got to be able to stay healthy and stay on the field. I get that. But then he's got this great tandem trio of running backs between Cordell Patterson and Tyler Algier, and now, of course, Bijan Robinson, a potentially weak defensive line for the New Orleans Saints that maybe is gelling by the time that they get to week 12, which could work in the Saints' benefit. But I think that Desmond Ridder is the guy that should be the quarterback in Atlanta. I'm glad that they didn't go down the road of some of these other quarterbacks and, spin that pick on, another quarterback or anything like that to complicate the situation. Let Desmond Ridder have the reins. Let him do what he's done his entire career, which is win. So the only person that's really going to get in the way of Desmond Ridder is Desmond Ridder himself, or the Falcons organization potentially making a bad decision, but it doesn't look like they're on the way to do that. So I'm very high on Desmond Ridder. I hope that he excels in Atlanta, just not against New Orleans, obviously, but I'm not going to, I'm not one of these guys that's going to come over here and say, yeah, I really liked him in the draft, but now that he's a Falcon, he's poo-poo. Like, no, thank you. No, thank you. I'm not here for that kind of mess.
Yeah, I understand that, because I was a big fan of Chris Olave, and I got nothing but
gotta give the dude props, right?
Yeah, it's like, he's good. Yeah, he's going to be a thorn in our side for a decade. So
yeah, and that's how I feel about Desmond Ridder. Like, you look at what the New Orleans Saints have struggled against when it comes to quarterbacks that can improv and young quarterbacks. Desmond Ridder got both of them. So I could see the New Orleans Saints struggling there. Although they did bring in their defensive line coach, Todd Grantham, with the specific goal of trying to revamp that defensive line and make them better against the improvisational freelancer type of quarterback. We'll see how quickly they can get in one offseason, though.
Well, my last question for you, Ross, is this the year that the Atlanta Falcons finally stop Taysom Hill?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Taysom Hill is stealing verses from Andre 3000. He's funnier than 85 South and that whole crew. He needs to take DC Young Fly's position on Wild 'N Out. Like, Taysom will forever be impactful against the city of Atlanta. He would cross up Trae Young, like all these other things. That's the only place where I'll really talk trash about. No, but seriously, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, like, if they haven't figured out how to defend Taysom Hill in the 7 years that he's been here in New Orleans now. I can't believe it's been that long, 6-7 years. I don't think that all of a sudden in 2017 or 2023, what's wrong with me? 2023, that they just find the antidote out of nowhere. So I think that Taysom Hill will continue to be the secret weapon. He and Chris Olave will continue to be the thorn in the side of the Atlanta Falcons. But I think that because of that, and especially with the weapons that Atlanta has continued to build over in the offensive side, and if Desmond Ridder gets comfortable in that offense, that just going to be some high scoring matches and reigniting this rivalry between the Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints, which I think is one of the best in sports.
Okay. Well, I was hoping, maybe Ryan Nielsen or David Onyemata or Caden Ellis would have some insights into how to stop Taysom Hill. So,
Nope.
uh, you know, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. Hopefully I can die a happy man by the Falcons holding Taysom Hill under, I don't know, 70
100
yards.
scrimmage yards. Yeah. Right.
But Ross, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your insight on the Atlanta Falcons. Let the people know where they can get this great insight on the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you want more on the New Orleans Saints, or you want to hear me talk a little bit more trash about the entire NFC South, I know I went through a whole like the division's whack, the quarterbacks are whack, like everything's whack about the NFC South. So you can come through for that over at Locked On Saints. A little bit of true talent over on that show, and respectful to the opponents that will give the New Orleans Saints some trouble in 2023.
So there's still more to come on today's episode with James Yarcho, the co-host of the Locked On Bucs podcast. He'll give his thoughts on Desmond Ridder, Bijan Robinson, and the Falcons potentially being a team on the rise. But first, guys, it's the perfect time to take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. All you got to do is bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over the unders, as well as who you think is going to hit that first homer, all on the app that's safe, secure, super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. So there's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200, up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. So, guys, you are back with another illustrious guest here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. He is one half of the Locked On Bucs podcast, none other than James Yarcho, another illustrious guest here to provide not his insight on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but his insight on the Atlanta Falcons. We are getting an quote-unquote enemy perspective on this Atlanta Falcons team. And James, welcome to the show. And I give you the floor to go as positive or negative railing against the Atlanta Falcons as you would like to be on today's episode.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and stay tuned, Falcons fans. I'm not going to bash you guys. I think what we're seeing from the Falcons right now is the start of building back to being a highly competitive football team. We're starting to see the building blocks put in place. The biggest question, of course, that everyone has, that I have, Falcons fans have, is Desmond Ridder the guy? Now, me being, I realize I host Locked On Buccaneers. I am 45 minutes north of Cincinnati. So I got to watch a lot of Desmond Ridder when he was playing for UC. My niece was actually a student during the time. And there's a lot to like about him. But it's one of those things where what we all loved watching him do with the UC Bearcats, is that something that's going to translate to the NFL? And I don't think we've gotten enough of a sample size to really be able to make that judgment. So I'm interested to see what kind of step Ridder takes in his NFL career, or if this is going to be a position that the Falcons have to address sooner rather than later. But you take a look at the moves that they've made so far. Yeah, some of it involves, aging veterans like Calais Campbell, who can still play, but he's obviously not in the long-term plan, right? He's going to be kind of a bridge player to help them get to that long-term player along the defensive line. But again, 45 minutes north of Cincinnati, I've watched a lot of Jessie Bates, and this dude is a absolute beast. He is a game wrecker. He is a game changer. He has that innate ability to make that one major play at a crucial time that can completely swing the momentum of the game. He can make a play in the middle of the second quarter that leads to a massive Falcons run where they end up scoring on their next 3 possessions, and the defense holds the opposing team to no points, and it'll all be sparked by Jessie Bates. I've watched it happen time and time again. He is a next level player. The Bengals were absolute morons for not figuring out how to get something done with him and then infuriating him with the franchise tag. It was a huge mess. So we knew Jessie Bates was gone from Cincinnati the minute he played on the franchise tag. Not happy that he is in Atlanta. Of course, they got my guy, Bowling Green State University Falcon, Scotty Miller, who made one of the most amazing catches in Buccaneers franchise history in the NFC Championship against the Packers. Now he's back to being a Falcon. Look, he's not going to light up your stat sheet. He's not going to be a fantasy superstar for you. But what he is going to do is he's going to provide the Falcons offense an opportunity to get 60 yards in the blink of an eye. He also started to dabble in special teams a little bit, and I think that's something that he can help with the Falcons. But outside of Calais Campbell being kind of the bridge guy, Jessie Bates being a game wrecker on the back end of the secondary, I had to give my love for Scotty Miller. The Falcons might have gotten the single best player in the draft. I was getting ripped to shreds. And Aaron, you remember when we did our Locked On Network mock draft, and I took Bijan Robinson at 19 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I got shredded. Bijan Robinson has all the makings to be the best and most impactful player of this draft class. Now, we also said the same things about Trent Richardson when he came out. So there is the off chance. We said the same things about Leonard Fournette, and Leonard Fournette's been good, but he hasn't been that guy. Now, there is that chance that Bijan Robinson isn't that guy. He can be good, but maybe he's not the generational talent that we all build him to be. If he is, that's a problem for the rest of the NFC South, period. And I loved Bijan Robinson's game. I loved what he brought to Texas, and now he has the ability to do that in Atlanta, and that's going to take a lot of pressure off of Desmond Ridder, right? He's a guy that's going to take a lot of pressure off of Desmond Ridder. The big question outside of Ridder that I have about the Atlanta Falcons is the usage of Kyle Pitts. Are we finally going to see Kyle Pitts truly get involved? Because what's a young quarterback's best friend? It's going to be a pass-catching running back. It's going to be an effective running back in the rushing game, but it's also going to be a sure-handed tight end that continues to move the ball. And I just, for the life of me, cannot understand how they're trying to utilize Kyle Pitts, because he will disappear for a month and then end up, exploding in one game. He needs to be an integral part of the game plan for the Falcons to succeed. And I just haven't seen them put it together the way that I personally would have, but there's a reason I'm talking to you and not coaching on the sidelines for the Atlanta Falcons, right? So that would be my biggest hang up about the Falcons is, who is Desmond Ridder? Who is Kyle Pitts? How can he help this team? And then is Bijan going to be the guy that we all think he can be? So that was a long-winded way of saying the direction the Atlanta Falcons are going right now, I think, is the most promising of the four teams of the NFC South right now today. Carolina is doing some interesting things. Tampa still has a lot of talent, but they're starting to age a little bit. New Orleans still has a lot of talent, but their biggest stars, their biggest studs are starting to age a little bit. Atlanta is now moving in the right direction with a lot of youth and some really talented bridge guys to get them more youth later down the road. And I would say in the next probably 2 seasons, we're going to be talking about how the Atlanta Falcons are a favorite to win the South.
Okay, James, I have no notes. I appreciate the nuanced take on the Atlanta Falcons. And so, I think fans will appreciate that, right? Because, fans get insight from a quote unquote enemy, and, they're like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But I think clearly, James, a little something, because basically you somehow summarized 5 months worth of content here on Locked On Falcons in about 5 minutes. So I really do appreciate you doing that. But that is going to do it with our enemy look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here from James Yarcho of Locked On Bucs. But James, go ahead and plug Locked On Bucs and where people can find your other stuff if they want to get such great insights on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I am the deputy editor of BucsNation.com. That is SB Nation's Buccaneers page. So you can find my written content over there. And then David Harrison and I, 5 days a week on the Locked On Bucs podcast. Of course, you can find that wherever you find Locked On Falcons, wherever you're listening, or if you're watching on YouTube, of course, Locked On Bucs will be right there as well. If you want to get a little perspective on your enemy, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I always try to be as fair and honest as possible, as long as it's not about the Saints, because they're the Saints and who cares? And they have a lot of Ohio State Buckeyes, and that just makes me hate them more.
Okay. Well, we share there's some overlap there. So, we are brothers in arms, so to speak, with our hatred for the New Orleans Saints. So that is something that even when the Falcons and Bucs come to the worst of blows, that we can commiserate on
That's
in the
right.
future. So really appreciate it, James.
Thank you much.
All right, guys, still have plenty on today's Locked On Falcons. We'll be wrapping up answering a leftover mailbag question about the value of positionless football here in Atlanta and elsewhere in the NFL. And we'll get into that as we wrap up today's podcast. All right, guys, before we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons, I do want to give a shout out to my everydayers out there that, of course, follow for free on YouTube and wherever else you listen to podcasts. And of course, if you want to make this illustrious podcast your first listen each and every day and become an everydayer, why not check out tomorrow's episode, where I believe we'll be talking with Ross Jackson about the New Orleans Saints, as well as some other topic that I'll figure out in the next 24 hours to pad out the show. And then, of course, we'll be talking with James Yarcho about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers later in the week. But basically, we'll be asking those guys, what's the case for those teams, their respective teams winning the division, and what's the case against. And of course, because Julian Council is a coward, the host of Locked On Panthers, we know that the Carolina Panthers cannot possibly win the NFC South. But let's move on and wrap up today's episode by answering a question from Mac13 at Red Pilled in Meek on Twitter. He says, sorry if I'm late to the party, but he has 3 questions. One is how positionless football concept gives opposing defenses trouble when shifting personnel at the line. Number 2 is how might those defenses adjust to it both in game and long term once they have tape on it. And 3, the pros and cons in today's NFL. I think positionless football, the point of it, the concept behind it is you can run a large portion of your playbook from fewer formations, right? And so therefore it's going to give defenses trouble to figure out what you're doing, and it's going to put pressure on defenses to try to match up in certain ways, right? We know that defenses tend to work based off of tendency. That's depending on formation, down and distance, time on clock, score, all that stuff. They're making educated guesses on what the offense is doing, and this is a big reason why you've heard me over the years say that, defensive play calling, while I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, can be a tad bit overrated because it's not as valuable as offensive play calling, because defenses are always kind of guessing at what an offense is doing and making educated guesses and primarily reacting to what the offense is doing. So therefore, the ability to out scheme an offense, it doesn't work the same way it does where an offense can out scheme a defense. But I think the challenges for defense and the adjustments that defense will make is, I don't know if they'll have to do a whole lot. I think it's going to put more emphasis on having more versatile players, probably more at the safety and linebacker position than elsewhere on your defensive side of the ball. Like, for example, when we're talking about what we're, positionless football, what I'm imagining, one example of what the Falcons can do is they'll, present 22 personnel, meaning they'll have 2 running backs and 2 tight ends on the field, right? 1 wide receiver, right? Those 2 running backs, let's say they're Bijan and Tyler Algier. Let's say the 2 tight ends are Kyle Pitts and Jonathan Smith. And of course, the 1 wide receiver is Drake London. And you could then motion Bijan out of the backfield, right, and put him as a slot receiver. You can split Kyle Pitts out wide, and he'll function primarily as a wide receiver. You can line Jonnu Smith as a tight end, and you can line him up in the backfield as a fullback. And so therefore, you could present 22 personnel, which defenses will normally match up with their base defenses by having a linebacker on the field to beef up against what is a quote unquote run formation. But you're basically operating 11 personnel, which is a 3 wide receiver set, which is a passing situation, which teams typically put their nickel defense against. And so therefore that's what I mean, where it's like you can run a larger variety of things from a fewer amount of formations because you have versatile players on offense. And I think the ways that defenses match up against this, and maybe other people have more insight into this that are more knowledgeable about this than I am. You know, how many people on the planet are like that? But of course I don't believe that because I'm so humble. But anyway, sorry to get distracted. But like the idea is that like you're creating mismatches. I think that's really what it boils down to. You're hoping to get a mismatch, say Bijan against a safety or a linebacker in the slot, because normally if it was nickel defense, he'd be lined up against a cornerback, and maybe that's a mismatch, but probably not to the same degree that it would be against a safety or a linebacker that now has to, you know, line up in the slot and cover Bijan in certain situations. So I think that's really the value of positionless football. I don't think it's any more than that. You know, I don't think it's going to be like this thing that takes the league by storm. It's just going to be like, hey, we have versatile players that we can do a lot of different things with. And defenses, by and large, will react to it the same way that they react to any type of innovation on offense. They just have to be a lot more disciplined and technical, right? You know, you still got to fit your run fits. You still got to rush the quarterback. You still got to cover. It just may create certain mismatches in coverage that normally wouldn't necessarily be there because you're now using this running back that defenses normally would say, oh, we'll just put a linebacker on him. You're using him as a wide receiver. And it's like, well, now it's pushing our linebacker, you know, to his full coverage extent. But if you have players like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Isaiah Simmons, or these type of like hybrid linebacker safety type of guys, I think those are the ideal type of guys that you're looking for, a Shaq Thompson type of player. So I don't know if it's going to be, you know, it's valuable. Don't get me wrong. I don't, you know, because we've been spending the last like 2-3 months talking about, you know, how it's going to change everything in Atlanta and how wonderful it's going to be. But at the same time, like, let's not sit here and act like, oh my God, like, you know, suddenly Nick Bosa is not going to be able to rush the quarterback because Bijan Robinson is out, split out wide. You know, like, still at the end of the day, defenses have to do the same things they would have to do on any play. It's just now there may be a couple of mismatches here or there, but that would be no different if you had Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd lined up at wide receiver rather than Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson. Those guys create mismatches as well. So I you know, it's not some sort of revolutionary thing. It just puts more pressure on defenses to be on their P's and Q's, be disciplined, and be a little bit more versatile. So I hope that answers your question, Mac 13. But that is going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. We'll have more NFC South adjacent content, talking Saints and Bucs later this week, guys. If you want to have questions answered on future mailbags or later this week, you can do so. Hit me up on Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons. Email lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, or you can hit up the Locked On Falcons Discord, the link in the description below. Guys, make sure you continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL, check out the Locked On Hawks podcast, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta to find out the lowdown on the other NFL teams, as well as what's going on with the other local teams like the Hawks, the Braves, Bulldogs, etc.